everyone, I'm Dr. Z. I'm a clinical psychologist specializing in transgender care. Welcome to my channel. This is a part 3 of a partner series videos to discuss what may be happening with the partners when your trans partners come out to you, what you may be feeling, how to best deal and cope with it. And this is also a series for trans partners themselves to better understand what the partners may be going through. In the second video, in part 2, I talked about coming out phase, and I talked about what you may be feeling when a partner comes out to you, and I broke it down into 3 groups that most likely tend to occur when trans partners come out to you. In this video, I'll be talking about after that coming out phase. Usually what happens after that coming out phase is there's a period of time. For each one of you, the period of time is going to be different. For some of you, it could be several days. For others, could be several weeks. For some, it could be as long as several months. After the period wears off, however long it is for you, what happens next is what I call initial shock. Initial shock is when that part of whatever happened in coming out, the information, remember how I said it's going to take some time to digest and to process information that your trans partner has presented to you when they did come out. So what happens in initial shock phase is that that's a period of time when suddenly things are settling in. Suddenly all of that processing, all of the thoughts are starting to really kind of, they're really starting to in a way stabilize themselves. In this initial shock phase, I have observed that partners tend to fall into 2 primary groups. Again, just with any of my videos, I tend to group things into categories to make things easier and simple. But a lot of times we have things that go beyond those 2 groups. This is just the most 2 common that I have observed in working with couples in therapy. Group number 1 of initial shock phase is when, as a result of things settling in and the emotions and feelings settling in and kind of stabilizing themselves, partners may feel a sense of catastrophe coming over, a sense of overwhelming anxiety coming over. What I mean by sense of catastrophe is that your headspace, your mind space starts to spin into a very catastrophizing narrative in a sense of really worrying about the future. You may be suddenly experiencing thoughts such as, oh my God, I am terrified what's going to happen. Oh my God, what's going to happen to our kids? How are you now going to come out to our kids if you have kids? What are others are going to think? Suddenly you're overly concerned about what others are going to think. Maybe some of your thoughts may even come out from social, cultural sense of transphobia that has accumulated in all of us. By the way, this is not to pinpoint on partners. We all have cultural transphobia. It's a byproduct of living in a transphobic world. And so as a result, you have all of these feelings come up in a sense of overwhelming anxiety and very big catastrophizing tendencies. Other form of catastrophizing could be starting to thinking about your intimate life with this partner. You may start questioning yourself, wait a second, I'm not a lesbian, or wait a second, I'm not a gay man, or wait a second, I'm not bisexual. So you're starting to question your sexuality because your partners, since they express their true authentic gender, the genders that you found yourself initially attracted to that led you into a relationship is now shifting. And because it is now shifting, you're suddenly starting to question your sexuality, which is normal, which is exactly what happens. You will question your sexuality, but that's going to be also part of this catastrophizing phase where suddenly you're overwhelmed, where suddenly everything just seems like it's never going to work out. Everything seems like it's going to fall apart. You may even have a panic attack. Sometimes people have panic attacks. Sometimes people just get really depressed thinking about this catastrophizing period. A lot of times what I see partners do, and I really do not recommend doing this during this catastrophizing phase, is because they get so terrified and so scared of losing their trans partners or losing everything they have built up to this point. Because let's acknowledge, for a lot of you, it's a whole life you had built up with this trans person. It's a whole, you may have decades together. You may have a house together. You may have children together. You may have pets together. You may have so many other things, memories, shared histories together. And it's a personal investment. Relationships are absolutely personal investment. And when things happen that potentially rock the loss of the personal investment, well, it's going to scare us and terrify us. And that's what's happening to you, is that it scares you and terrifies you. And out of that fear, one of the defenses that I see partners employ, which again, I don't recommend because it just doesn't work, it doesn't serve anybody, are ultimatums. So if you're listening to this and you already gone through catastrophizing phase and you already employed ultimatums, you know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't gotten through this phase, just be mindful of that. Ultimatums, what are they? Usually they sound something along the lines of partners telling their trans partners, I'm going to leave you if you're going to transition. I'm going to divorce you if you're going to transition. If you transition, you're going to lose everything. If you transition, I'm taking the kids and I'm walking away. It's a very drastic me or transition type of option. There's no win-win. There's only one way. And it's either going to be my way or it's going to be your way. You have to realize that it's no win-win situation. If the person chooses your ultimatum, then they lose. And if you choose to walk away, you also lose. So it's a no win-win. I also don't like ultimatums because telling your partner, telling your trans partner during this time period that if you transition, I'm going to leave you. If you transition, I'm going to divorce you. You're basically telling them, but if you don't transition, I'll stay with you. And I just don't see how is that relationship going to work out for you. Now that you know the true gender identity of your partner, aren't you afraid that as a result, they will start harboring and cultivating contempt and resentment toward you, which, by the way, happens all of the time. So I just think when things of such seriousness as gender dysphoria comes up in a relationship, and if a person really feels like they need to transition, especially if they feel like they need to transition, ultimatums just never serve anybody. So I want you to be keep mindful about that. Now, remember how I said in part 1 of the video, as partners, you always have a sense of agency. You also always have a sense of your own independence to be able to make decisions for you. And if you truly decide that this relationship is not for you, I will be the first person to 100% support your decision, because I think we all have to do what's best for us. This is also why the partners are coming out to you, because they have to decide what's ultimately best for their health. But to throw away ultimatums and to tell a person you have to choose, it's almost like telling somebody that really needs medical attention that I will leave you if you get this medical attention. So you have to understand that it doesn't really work like that. So very much caution partners against ultimatums. They never work. I have yet to see ultimatum work. They always have even worse consequences, and people just end up resentful, hateful toward each other, and things end up ending anyway. I'd rather for people in a relationship, if it's not going to work out for you, if you're going to decide, this just changes the nature of relationship completely to such extent that I don't see this is happening. I don't see this is making it, which happens, and we have to acknowledge that happens. I'd rather for both of you to appreciate and respect the investment you put into it, and to part still being acquaintances in the very least, friends in the very best, still parents if you have children or pets, in a very, very best case. That's what I really want for everybody, versus having this breakaway because of the ultimatum. So that's group number 1 that tends to react when catastrophizing during initial shock happens. You tend to catastrophize, anxiety takes over. As a result, fears come up. All of these fears, what's now? As a result of fears, you may offer ultimatums. Now, I want to acknowledge there are partners sometimes who do offer ultimatums, and they don't necessarily mean it when they do it. It's more a defense mechanism in order to try to hold on and control and have control over situations that they feel they don't have control over. That's a different scenario. A lot of times those partners come back and they say, you know what, I didn't really mean it, not that drastically, but that's what I felt at the moment. So that's a different scenario too. But ultimatums that you truly mean, they just don't work, people. I'm sorry. They truly do not work. I don't know a couple therapist who's going to tell you that ultimatums ever work in a relationship. So that's group number one. Another group that tends to fall into a pattern most commonly, if you're not feeling catastrophizing and a sense of anxiety during initial shock, what another group tends to feel is an overwhelming sense of denial, an overwhelming sense of denial in a sense of where you're really not acknowledging the reality. You're really not acknowledging, not even reality, but you're not acknowledging the seriousness of the situation, in a sense that you're not allowing yourself to accept to what extent it's going to change things in your relationship, because it does change things in a relationship. So as a result, what happens in this phase of denial for those people, the ways they tend to come out when trans partners come out and express themselves during this initial shock phase, is that you end up doing the opposite. Whereas one group tends to over-catastrophize and give ultimatums, this group over here that's more in denial, what they tend to do is they tend to now be overly supportive, be overly, it's okay, we'll figure this out, I love you, I'll support you, it's okay if you start expressing yourself when you prefer gender, let me help you out, what do you need, what can I get you, let's figure out how to come out to our kids if the kids are involved. So it's a partner who is suddenly like overly supportive. And I see partners, especially in a long-term marriage, that are overly supportive. For me personally, as a clinician, it's a little bit of a red flag, because the reality is that, well, this is something serious that just shook up your relationship. And like I said so many times before, I'm married for 16 years. And if my husband came out and told me that he is questioning his gender, as much as I would want to be supportive, I probably will say something to the extent of, I'll support you, but I'm shaken up and I have no idea what's going to happen, and I have no idea how it's going to evolve. So that's a different type of support versus being suddenly so Pollyannish, if you will. Everything is wonderful. Oh, this is so great. You identify as transgender. I will support you. Oh, that's great. Let's go clothing shopping. It's a little bit overly extreme. There's got to be a shaken up factor, because why shouldn't there be? You're in a relationship. Gender is a big component of that relationship. A partner came out. I'm not saying that it has to be to the extent where you giving out ultimatums and you catastrophizing, but there's got to be some base of reality here. So this is the individuals in this group tend to be in denial, and that's another form of defense. Whereas for the groups that tends to get very anxious, the defense is to give out ultimatums in order to relinquish control. This group over here, because they're in denial, their defense is to be overly accommodating, to be overly supportive. Also, in a way, to relinquish control of the situation. But over here, you're trying not to lose. Both the groups notice fear losing the partner, by the way. But this one, the way they try to control a situation is by maintaining sense of control, by being overly supportive. So don't leave me, I'll support you. This one over here says, if you do this, I will leave you. So it's a different type of situation. Although one can say this is also maybe overly supportive ultimatum, if you will. So those are the two most common categories that people tend to fall into when they get into initial shock phase, is that ultimatums or being overly supportive. I totally understand why people fall into those groups. I think it's totally normal to fall into those groups, no matter how on the surface that may look like. Because initially people who are over here in denial, they wake up out of the denial. I'll talk about it in the next videos. And it becomes a reality check, and then they freak out. And then people over here sometimes adapt to the situation that they didn't think they would adapt. We're humans. These situations are complex, they're difficult. The longer you've been in a relationship, the more complex, the more nuanced your situation is going to be, because you have that much investment in your relationship. You have that much investment in each other. So there's going to be all this little interplays into place. It's not easy. I feel for both sides. I feel tremendously for the partners. I feel tremendously for the trans partners. It's nobody's fault. It's stuff that happens. I call it life. Shit happens. And it sucks, and it's not fair. There's no fair, unfair, why me, why you. The more you're going to ask yourself those questions, the more you're going to get stuck. The more resentful you're going to get toward leaving. The best thing is just to acknowledge, all right, let me deal with what's in front of me, and how can I best adapt. So these are the most two common groups that in a phase 2 initial shock tend to fall into those categories. Comment below if you're watching. Let me know. Let me know what you think. Let me know whether you fell as a partner into one category or into another. Whether you fall into the category of individuals who were. Did you catastrophize? Did you give your partner ultimatum? How did that work out for you? Did you then realize that it's not going to work out? What was the nature of your ultimatum? Do you mind sharing that below? If you're over here and you felt a sense of denial and you were over supportive and then reality kicked in, what happened? How did you feel about it? Did that scare you? Like I said, partners feel all kinds of things. And if you're a trans partner, comment below and let me know as a trans partner, what group of category did you witness your partner fall into? What was it like for you? What was the most challenging thing for you about seeing them in that category? And stay tuned for part 4 of the series.